Hello and welcome to the Drexel interview. I'm your host, Paula Marantz-Cohen, and today I'm pleased to have as my guest Gail Shister, television columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Gail Shister covers everything from the corporate side of television to the creative and personality side. Gail Shister, welcome to the Drexel interview.
Thrilled to be here.
Good. Well, I want to start by looking back at your career. You were originally a sports writer.
Yes.
And you were the first female sports writer at a Buffalo paper and a New Orleans paper and the first at the Inquirer, and you arrived there, I think, in 1982?
1979.
1979, okay, I missed a few years.
You almost were able to advance to the bonus round.
Ah.
Right till the end.
Okay, so I don't know where I got 82, but...
That's when I started the column.
Okay, so before that, you were doing sports.
Yes.
Tell us about being a sports writer, being one of the first female sports writers at these papers, or the first at these papers, and one of the first probably nationally.
Yes.
What was that like, and what sports did you cover?
I covered only male sports out of choice. I was offered, when I came to the paper in New Orleans, they asked me, do you want to cover women's sports? And I said, if you want to hire a woman to cover women's sports, you have the wrong woman. Because I didn't want to be ghettoized like that. I mean, you don't hire a black reporter to cover only black news. So I didn't want to paint myself into that corner. So I covered only men's sports: basketball, football, baseball, tennis, and at the college level. And that was my choice also, because I like the kids at that age. I love the university. I love to be on campus, and the kids aren't completely jaded yet. They haven't turned pro. And make more money in one game than you do in your lifetime. So they have a different attitude. Mm-hmm. So that's what I cover.
And then what happened? Why did you go into television?
After 7 years of writing sports in 3 different newspapers, I just got very, very tired of getting thrown out of the locker room. It's a funny story to tell when you're on the lecture circuit. I have a lot of funny stories about being thrown out of the locker room, but when you're actually in the experience, there's nothing fun about it at all, particularly when you're writing for a morning newspaper and you've got a hellacious deadline and you've got all your competitors walking into the locker room and they're telling you, usually the only female covering the event, that I can't go in and I have the worst deadline. There is not one single fun thing about that. There were many, many times I wanted to get out of sports, but I knew whether I wanted to be or not, I was first generation. I was a pioneer, and I knew if I quit, there might not be a second generation, and it would feed into a lot of negative stereotypes that men had before, that women can't handle the pressure. So I hung in for 7 years, and I'm very happy to say now that we have several female sports columnists. We've had a female sports editor. We've got a lot of female sports copy editors, but that wasn't even the main reason. The main reason was I started to realize that to be the only person of your gender in a very high-stress work environment, particularly one that involves travel, ultimately becomes psychologically and emotionally unhealthy. And I really started to feel that. I really started to miss the companionship of women. I had nobody to talk to unless I wanted to hang out with the boys, and most of them would go out drinking after a game, and it was usually 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was a way for them to unwind, and I wasn't into that. And I started feeling very alienated by being the only female.
So it stopped being fun. And how did you choose television? I mean, how did you become the television columnist for the Inquirer? Did they tap you? Did you choose it? What happened?
Well, I didn't really choose television. Television chose me. What happened was I had transferred to the features department in 1982, and I was writing general assignment features for the weekend section. And one day, the editor at that time called me in his office, and he said, our TV columnist is going on a 6-week medical leave, and we need you to do the column. At that time, it was a daily column. And I said, I have absolutely no background, no sources, and above all, no interest, which is perfect at the Inquirer.
You want to say that on the air?
Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah,
so I got thrown.
Gives you a perspective, right?
It certainly does.
Distance.
Drowning really wakes you up quickly. So I got thrown in, and any normal, sane person would have just babysat the beat for 6 weeks and rewritten press releases. I'm very competitive by nature. I've always had a beat that I cover, and I threw myself into it and started learning about television and started going around to the local stations and having them teach me about ratings. I actually broke a few stories, which was unheard of because the Daily News TV columnists at the time totally owned the beat. And I was actually able to break a few stories. Flash forward, 6 weeks are up. Gail goes back to the weekend section. 2 weeks later, the TV columnist quits. And editor calls me back in. He says, we want you to take over the TV column until we can hire a real TV writer. And that was in 1982, so I assume they're still looking.
And that was, then you were writing, you said 5 days a week?
I started out with a column doing 6 days a week.
6 days?
Yes, I wrote every day but Sunday, and back then Gene Roberts was the editor, and I went into him at one point. I used to file 2 columns every Friday for Saturday and for Monday. Went into his office, and I said, you have 2 choices. Cut me to 5 or put me in a rest home. So he chose door number 2. No, not really. He chose door number 1, and then for many years I did 5 a week, and then cut to 4 a week, which was much, much better because that gave me 1 day a week that I wasn't on deadline, where I could do long business lunches or spend a lot of time working the phones, go to New York, where I go regularly. And then we decided about 6 months ago, the editor said they want me to start writing longer pieces for the Sunday section. So we cut it to 3, and I'm doing more Sunday pieces.
Okay, so it's 3 days, which is a little bit manageable, but you're doing more other pieces, so
yes,
it balances out. Sounds like a stressful job. It sounds like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
Yeah.
And when the question I'm often asked is, how can you still be doing this after 25 years? Because it's pretty unheard of for a newspaper person to be doing a deadline column for this long, particularly one that's more than once or twice a week. And what scares me is that normal tenure for something like this, I'm guessing, is about 5 or 6 years. And I probably had a nervous breakdown 15 years ago, and I didn't notice. So that's the only explanation I come up with.
Well, you must love the job. I mean, you must love what you do. What do you love about it? Why do you do it?
I love the beat. I love the beat.
What is the beat? What does it consist of? What do you do?
Well, before I answer that, I want to tell you one of the things I love about the beat, particularly coming off of 7 years of sports, is that it's about 50-50 men and women. And I like that part of the beat, that it's not strictly all women or all men. And I'll tell you, it smells a lot better.
Okay.
So that's a very good thing.
All right.
I am a child of television. I grew up watching it. I have a passion for television. I watch a lot of TV. And I still get turned on by what I do. I'm still a beat reporter. That's still what I do. I have a piece of real estate that I'm in charge of, and I've established long-lasting relationships, which is also the way I like to work, which is why I like a beat. If you're a general assignment reporter, one day you can cover a fire, one day you can cover a murder, and there are people you see on a story that you'll never see again. I've been working with some of the people on my beat for 25 years, and it's not the kind of beat where people come and go a lot.
Well, so who are the people that you've worked with continuously?
So you want me to drop names here?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I've known Tom Brokaw for 25 years, Dan Rather, Barbara Walters. I knew Peter Jennings quite well, Diane Sawyer, Leslie Stahl, Ted Koppel, Tim Russert.
And who of these people did you particularly like or dislike? Perhaps you don't want to talk about the latter, but you could probably talk about the former.
Well, there's none of them that I really actively dislike because they're at the top of their game. They're professionals.
They're good at what they do.
But they're professionals. I get along much better with the network people than I do with the local people.
Why is that?
I think that's because the level of professionalism is very different, and I think that local TV news people know that a lot of print people hold them in disdain and don't think they're real journalists, and that they reinforce a lot of the negative stereotypes about television when there's a parody of of a news operation, whether it's a movie or a TV show, it's generally of a local news station.
And like Anchorman, for example.
Exactly, and there's generally your Barbie doll and your Ken doll, and your weather guy and your sports guy, and they're all cookie cutters and interchangeable parts. The thing that I find so amusing over the years is that when I call a network person, unless they've been hit by a truck, they generally call me back in a timely fashion because, newsflash, we are in a deadline business. When I call local people, I might get a call back 4 or 5 days later, and they don't understand why I'm annoyed.
So what is Barbara Walters like?
In what regard?
Oh, well, that's it's open-ended, purposely open-ended. I guess I assume she's a pro, but what is she like personally in terms of, I've always been curious about her. She reminds me of my mother-in-law.
How so?
She seems sharp. She seems a bit judgmental. She seems like she could be a piece of work.
A piece of work, you mean that in a bad way?
No, not necessarily. But, knows what she wants, let's put it that way.
And I've never met a successful person who doesn't. Have you?
I guess not.
Yeah. I think that's part of the
So
DNA.
who's interviewing who here?
Yeah,
you didn't answer. You didn't
caught on. Yeah.
You didn't answer my question. What is Barbara Walters?
What is she like? She is a force of nature. She's a very little person physically, and she takes over a room. She has a lot of control. She's a very difficult person to interview. I've interviewed her many times over the years because she tries to take control of the interview. And she's so used to being on the other end and being the interviewer that she really dislikes being the interviewee. And she's always worried about what she says and how she's going to look when it comes on. And she doesn't have control. She cannot edit it.
Interesting.
And it's not, she told me years ago that she generally doesn't like to do print interviews because she's worried that she's going to be misquoted and something will be taken out of context, whereas if she's doing a live TV interview, she knows it'll show up the way she said it, which I've always thought was pretty ironic. She's got a great sense of humor, very bawdy, and can be temperamental, but we get along very well. I make her laugh.
Yeah, well, I could see that you have a sense of humor.
Where to go?
But what do you think about the fact that these people, these network news people, perhaps their time is past? I mean, do you think that's true? There's been a lot of talk about that, the end of the anchor person as we know it. Do you feel that this is the end of an era and that we're going to have a whole different sort of setup with the end of these big figures, these giant figures that we had?
Yes, I do think that in terms of the anchorman being an iconic figure in the culture, I think that time has passed. I don't think we're going to see another Walter Cronkite or even a Dan Rather or a Tom Brokaw or a Peter Jennings by definition, because it's a completely different universe that the media operates in now. So there isn't one person who's going to have 15 million viewers a night anymore. There are too many choices. And the longevity of the network newscast itself is in question because of the explosion of the internet. It's already happening now. There's not a network news operation that's not funneling a lot of its resources into the net. And they're all streaming their newscasts. CBS puts out a program live on the net around before the newscast where Katie Couric talks about the backstory to a story coming on, the evening news. Other networks do newscasts on the web before the 6:30 newscast with original content that's created just for the web. You can get the newscasts now, you can get all of them on podcasts. So the delivery system is changing so radically and it's so diffuse that you're not getting this one person who's reaching a great massive audience in one medium anymore. And the other thing, but the other thing is, you're not going to see the kind of tenures that these anchors had before. You're not going to see that again. The 3 men who just left as anchors each had anchored for more than 20 years. The jobs just become too difficult. The mediums become too fickle. And I just believe that those days are gone.
Is that a loss in your opinion?
I think it's a loss in the sense that the previous 3, Jennings, Brokaw, and Rather, were all consummate newsmen. They were all first-class reporters who had paid their dues, who had reported from all over the world under arduous conditions,